At the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries, he plays a pivotal role in shaping and executing sustainable energy initiatives, including the Green Hydrogen Policy, the Draft National Renewable Energy Policy, and the Wind Resource Assessment Program, or WRAP. Through his work, Mr. Rawlins is helping to transition our country's energy landscape, traditionally centered on petroleum, to one that supports national climate goals and the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. His talk today will focus on how geoscientists can contribute to this transformation through strategic data analysis, resource evaluation, and policy implementation. The title of his talk today is Grounded in Sustainability, Geoscience for a Resilient Trinidad and Tobago. So without further ado, I would like to introduce Mr. Rawlins to the talk.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for having me. I guess let's start presentation. Are you also in a full screen?
Yes.
Okay, good. So good everyone. My name is Shaquille Rawlins, and I'm a sustainable energy analyst at the Ministry of Energy. And basically, over the next 30 to 40 minutes, I will share insights as to how geoscience is central to advancing sustainability and addressing all of the environmental challenges that our smaller and developing state is actually experiencing. So today we will look at an overview of how sustainability relates to geoscience. We'll then look at the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and Trinidad and Tobago's climate commitments. Then we'll take a brief look at what's driving the wave of sustainability locally, and also the renewable energy potential that exists with wind, solar, and geothermal. I'll also introduce the concept of power to X, and then we'll finally look at how geoscience enables good policy making, and once incorporated into decision making, a lot could be done. So, despite the geological blessings that the country has, we face significant sustainability challenges that demands our urgent attention. When you think of the current energy system we have, is basically characterized by heavy reliance on natural gas, as both the electricity generation and our export economy is dominated by it. I believe this year we have 168 years of production, and so of course, because of this history, when you think of geoscience in Trinidad, it's immediately linked to hydrocarbon exploration and production. But of course, the role of geoscientists is more than that, and it's evolving rapidly in 2025. It actually puts more emphasis on a broader range of subject matters that include things like groundwater management, natural hazard assessment, infrastructure development, and also renewable energy resource evaluation. Also, what's notable is that a lot of major energy companies have already established their own ESG goals, and they have dedicated teams working towards assessing and meeting these targets. So for those who don't know, ESG basically stands for environmental, social, and governance, which is a framework used by companies and investors to basically assess how a business manages its risk and opportunities related to sustainability and, well, ethical impact. So for us as geoscientists, ESG means basically ensuring that resource extraction and exploration is done in a way that minimizes environmental damage, while of course respecting the communities that we work in and following international standards. So what is sustainability and what are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals? So sustainability could be thought of as meeting the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own. And the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals basically are a set of 17 interconnected objectives that all UN member states adopted in 2015 at the Paris Agreement, I believe, which aims to address the planet's most pressing challenges, which would include environmental, social, and economic. So you could basically say the SDGs is a universal call to action to end poverty, protect the planet, and ensure prosperity for all, of course, underpinned by principles of inclusivity, equity, and sustainability. And as geoscientists, we play a huge role in enabling almost all of these. But there are a few particular key pillars that I think that we have a stronger role in. And this would, of course, be SDG 6 when it comes to clean water and sanitation, SDG 7 when it comes to clean and affordable energy, SDG 9 when it comes to industry, innovation, and infrastructure, and also SDG 13 when it comes to climate action. So when it comes to clean water and sanitation, hydrogeologists and environmental geoscientists play a huge role as they conduct what you call aquifer mapping and groundwater quality assessments to try and delineate the extent of aquifers and also analyze recharge rates and assess vulnerabilities to threats like floods, drought, and saline intrusion, depending on if you live near the coast. Also, as sea levels rise and storms intensify, a lot of the sediment transport studies, the shoreline change analysis, and also erosion modeling that's done by geoscientists provide a lot of much needed data that's utilized by coastal engineers to try and design robust barriers and other types of mitigation strategies. When it comes to clean and affordable energy, our work could definitely lay with renewable energy site assessment and also resource estimations. So things like evaluating solar radiation profiles, the geothermal gradient, and also the geothermal reservoirs to try and identify the best locations for establishing these projects. We have a huge role to play in this. And also, while hydrocarbons remain a big part of the global energy mix, we also lead in advocating for a lot of the sustainable oil and gas extraction methods that should be utilized. So techniques like carbon capture and storage and enhanced oil recovery, which basically allows us to optimize the resource that we currently have while trying to reduce the emissions, is something that's much needed, is much more needed in order to facilitate this just and responsible transition that we're in the middle of. When it comes to infrastructure planning and these things now, geoscience plays, of course, a critical role in enabling resilient and sustainable cities. So when I think of infrastructure planning through site suitability assessments, a lot of geological and geotechnical data is needed. Of course, this would be to try and ensure that when you're building infrastructure like bridges and hospitals, they're not built within fault zones or they're not built on fault lines. Of course, to try and minimize the risk from landslides and soil liquefaction and other secondary hazards from seismic activity. So you could say that disaster risk reduction is another big role that we play in enabling sustainable cities. And of course, we do hazard mapping, which of course guides a lot of urban planning and also infrastructure design, and also early warning systems. We play a big part in establishing the data that's needed for early warning systems. Of course, when it comes to climate action, we have a foundational role. One of our major contributions, of course, lies in identifying and characterizing the geological formations that are actually capable of storing carbon dioxide over the long term for carbon sequestration. Also, something that's not often thought about, but establishing environmental baselines, utilizing the long-term geological data and climate records from cores. We help policymakers and researchers distinguish between the natural variability and a lot of the anthropogenic, or what you call human change, in nature, which basically enables evidence-based adaptation strategies. So I think it's kind of fair to say that geoscience plays a huge role in achieving global sustainable development. And I want to highlight the significance of our companies like Heritage Petroleum's ESG strategy and how it basically aligns with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So at the core of their approach, what I found is that they have a commitment to environmental stewardship, which basically involves tracking emissions and promoting biodiversity conservation, which of course aligns with SDG 13, which is climate action, SDG 15, which contributes to life on land, and SDG 12. Also, they have a strong dedication to community engagement and resilience, which basically is the social upliftment aspect of their strategy. And by empowering the local communities, they not only enhance the capacity of the residents, but they also address a lot of broader societal issues. And of course, this aligns with SDG 11, which emphasizes sustainable cities and communities again, and SDG 4 would actually advocate for quality education and community involvement. The governance, what I found is it basically ensures accountability, and they try to align with global initiatives to try and reinforce the commitment to responsible energy production. So I'd say that by aligning their ESG strategy with the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, they're not only contributing to global efforts, but also setting a benchmark for others in the local industry when it comes to ESG. So we spoke about sustainability. We could talk something about the Trinidad and Tobago's climate commitments. So the country has made some clear commitments on the international stage. We are signatory to the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, and we have our own national climate change policy alongside a framework for renewable energy policy. As previously mentioned under the Paris Agreement in 2015, we would have submitted our intended nationally determined contributions, which are now our nationally determined contributions. And they basically call for a reduction in cumulative emissions from 3 sectors, which are transportation, heavy industry, and power generation. So when you think about it, as a country that's heavily dependent on hydrocarbons, this is not a small task, and it will require not just technical solutions, but a lot of deep economic transformation, diversification, and significant investments in renewable energy technologies. And as we continue the conversation on sustainability, I think it's important to take a closer look at the country's actual greenhouse gas emissions. When looking at emissions over time, basically, Trinidad and Tobago was the 104th largest emitter since 1990, but this actually adds up to less than 1% of total cumulative emissions. But despite this, in 2023, due to our small population of only around like 1.4 million people, we ranked 14th out of 191 countries when it comes to carbon dioxide per capita. So even though we have a very small total amount of greenhouse gas, we're responsible for a very small amount of greenhouse gases, us being 14th out of 191 countries per capita reflects that we have a serious sustainability issue or the way that we utilize and produce energy. So of course, you would need to ask the question where our emissions actually coming from. And from work that's done, the answer was found to be primarily from the power generation and industrial sectors, which of course is the backbone of our economy. From the data, it's clear that carbon dioxide is the dominant greenhouse gas, while followed by methane and nitrous oxide. And 69% of the CO2 emissions actually come from just 3 sectors, which would be ammonia, electricity generation, and methanol. So in order to effectively reduce the national emissions and actually meet our national determined contribution targets, we have to prioritize decarbonizing these 3 industries as a nation. So what this would basically look like is shifting towards producing green ammonia, green methanol and generating electricity from renewables, instead of course, solely relying on natural gas combustion. And this is where the concept of power to X becomes critical. But I have some more slides on it later on, so again, we'll talk about it some more. So why are we talking about sustainability in Trinidad all of a sudden? Like what's driving the need for this? I found that there were three main factors. Of course, first would be our national climate and energy transition goals that were set through the frameworks like the Paris Agreement and the National Climate Change Policy. Also, the need for economic diversification and our energy security concerns, especially when given the risk posed by our dwindling gas supply. It pushes us to basically rethink the entire energy landscape. And also we face a lot of external pressures, particularly the introduction of what is called the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, or CBAM, which basically is a carbon tax on emissions of all goods entering the European Union. So from 2026, Trinidadian exporters of certain products must purchase what you call CBAM certificates that reflect the amount of emissions. And once the product crosses a certain threshold, you'll be liable to pay a fine for the product coming into the country. So again, while basically threatening the traditional hydrocarbon model, CBAM basically is a strategic driver for the country to position itself as a Caribbean leader in clean industrial processes, of course, provided that we could effectively bridge the technical expertise and policy implementation in the long term. But in the short term, sustainability should no longer be seen as optional, but more as a strategic move to try and sustain the current energy sector without compromising, of course, the needs of future generations. So I guess we could talk a little bit about renewable / sustainable energy now. One of the least tapped but highly promising renewable resources is actually geothermal energy. Of course, this is heat that's generated by the flow of, energy that's generated by the flow of heat from the Earth's interior, mainly from the radioactive decay of isotopes deep in the mantle and crust. And as this heat basically radiates from towards the surface, it creates what you call a geothermal gradient, which is essentially temperature increase with depth. And globally, this could range from about 15 degrees Celsius per kilometer to around 30 degrees Celsius per kilometer, depending on the localized geological setting. And from the diagram on the right, you could see the area, which is the Pacific Ring of Fire, which is another area that's rich in geothermal activity. And I would say that is very important to understand the geoscience that revolves around this, as the structure of the crust, the heat flow, and the fluid dynamics, understanding how this works, is absolutely essential to try and effectively and sustainably harness geothermal energy. And of course, given our region's geological makeup, there's real interest and real opportunity to pursue this further, specifically in places like Dominica, Antigua, and also Guadeloupe, who actually right now has the only geothermal plant in the Caribbean. It's a 4.5 megawatt plant, I believe. When we zoom into Trinidad and Tobago specifically, we have a lot of potential also. Research actually done by UTT highlighted significant geothermal potential in the forest reserve area, particularly when it comes to utilizing the abandoned wells in the area to store carbon. And also the geological mapping that was done shows the extensive fault zones and extensive mud volcano activity that of course hints at an accessible geothermal reservoir. At UTT again, George et al. Would have done another paper that actually modeled the integration of carbon capture and storage with geothermal energy, utilizing carbon dioxide as the working fluid. and they utilize a program called CMG to do reservoir simulations and analyze the geothermal viability and carbon dioxide storage. And it was actually found that if properly developed, this could provide a stable, low source of baseload energy, which is something renewables like solar and wind actually struggles to guarantee because of its intermittence without expensive battery storage. So switching gears to solar, which is easily one of the most recognizable forms of renewable energy today, especially PV, which converts the sunlight into electricity via the solar panels. The Caribbean is well positioned to harness this. And looking at the chart, you can see that while islands like Jamaica and Barbados, they lead CARICOM basically in solar generation, Trinidad and Tobago still is relatively underdeveloped. But we have a lot of potential. And in fact, just one large-scale renewable energy project will significantly boost our penetration levels. And from the map on the right, from the World Bank, you could actually see that throughout the entire island, we have very high solar irradiation levels, which indicates that is very favorable conditions for both rooftop and utility scale solar PV developments. So I guess we could talk about some of the projects that actually have happened. One of them, on the small scale, the government has already taken a number of steps to basically start integrating renewables through pilot projects. One of this would be what you call the Phase 2 Renewable Energy and Energy Efficiency Project, which basically focused on installing solar in 18 schools and community centers that were specifically designed for emergency shelters. The project basically wasn't just about increasing the renewable energy capacity, but also about increasing public education and a huge effort to basically increase the awareness around renewable energy and energy efficiency in communities to try and get people on a more sustainable path. So pilot projects like this might be small individually, but collectively, as the years go by and it's built upon, is a good foundation for larger national scale shifts towards utilizing sustainable energy in places that is not usually seen. And continuing with small and medium-sized projects, another notable project that was actually completed around a month ago is the United Arab Emirates Caribbean Renewable Energy Fund project, where a 500 kilowatt solar system, which is the same size as what's at the airport in Piaco, was actually connected to the rooftop of the grandstand in the Queen's Park Savannah, along with electric vehicle charging stations. And the project will offset for around 500,000 kilograms of carbon dioxide per year. Is completed. It's to be commissioned, but when it is, people from the public could easily go and charge their cars for free, their electric vehicles. And of course, it's also to try and combat more projects like this will be happening. And it's also to combat what you call range anxiety when it comes to people and electric vehicles. So a lot of people are hesitant to transition to utilizing EVs because there just aren't enough chargers in the country. And because we primarily produce electricity using natural gas, some people don't see it as a reason, as a effective method. So the more grid connected renewable energy projects with EV chargers that are in the country will definitely increase the sustainable energy penetrations in the nation. Now, on the large scale, there's a 92.2 megawatt solar farm project actually being constructed in Couva. It's being developed by a consortium of Lightsource BP, Shell, and BP. And it will actually be the first large-scale solar farm in Trinidad. when operational, it should supply power to approximately 20,000 homes, and offset about 123,000 tons of carbon dioxide annually. Currently, construction is going on, but this project is not just significant for the environmental impact, but on a regional scale, I believe it's the second largest solar farm in the Caribbean region when completed. So it's actually a statement for the country that the government and also private sector is growing a lot of confidence in deploying sustainable energy projects. Now, turning to wind energy, which is another exciting frontier. In 2024, the Wind Energy Steering Committee would have been established to oversee both onshore and offshore wind development. And the committee basically launched what you call a RAP, a Wind Resource Assessment Program, where we went and installed devices called LiDAR systems at the Port of Galeota and Whitehap Waterloo, basically to try and collect accurate wind resource measurements over the next 12 to 18 months. This phase is actually extremely important because it will basically inform the data that we get from the LiDARs, will basically inform site selection, the system design, and a lot of investment decisions also. And again, this is another clear demonstration that Trinidad and Tobago is taking a scientific and informed approach to basically expanding on sustainable energy initiatives. So basically, this is where the concept of power to X comes in. Is basically the process of converting renewable energy, which would be green electrons, into other forms of energy or synthetic fuels. So when you think of power to X, you can think of renewable energy like solar, wind, or geothermal being the power, and X representing green hydrogen, which could be used to produce many other types of low carbon fuels and chemicals. And basically, by embracing this concept, it not only reduces our greenhouse gas footprint, but it also positions the country to be able to export green commodities that will be at a premium price, while basically avoiding the carbon taxes, well, the current carbon taxes and any future carbon taxes. But basically, until we have the utility scale renewable energy online, in the short term, we could actually utilize carbon capture and storage and create what we call blue hydrogen to try and serve as a transitional solution, while, again, the long-term focus will still be on scaling up green hydrogen. So sustainability basically ensures that current needs are met without jeopardizing the future generations. Of course, while resilience basically enables us to withstand, adapt, and recover from a lot of the shocks and disasters. And I would say that this actually has to become a national priority as we face a lot of increasing climate vulnerability and a shift in economic landscape. Geoscience and geoscientists play a critical role in basically shaping national policy, and by embedding our geoscientific insights and leveraging other things, we could actually develop strategies to better manage the country's natural resources, proactively identify risks, and also adapt more effectively to a lot of the growing impacts of climate change. And as we conclude our discussion, I think it's essential to reflect on the key takeaways. Again, we have significant potential and untapped resources that could actually be harnessed to drive sustainable development locally and the energy transition for the long term by utilizing renewable energy and other essential aspects of our skill set, like managing water security and climate resilience, geoscientists have a huge role to play. And again, the journey towards a sustainable future is basically a collective effort, and our role should no longer just be to study the earth and study rocks, but to try and actively shape a resilient and low climate future. So I'd say thank you, and that would be my presentation, and I would take any questions that you all have.
Thank you, Shaquille. And we open the floor now for any questions. You can also post your questions in the chat. Yes, David.
Hi, Shaquille. That was a really comprehensive presentation, more than I thought it would be. So my first question, just to kind of get the ball rolling, is the numbered targets that you showed. That was part of a UN policy for countries or for the globe, or just a way for us to approach sustainability going forward?
So the UN targets.
The ESG goals that you had that were numbered at the beginning of your presentation, like these ones in the, yeah.
These here?
Yeah, these here. Yeah.
So these would be what I would have found that geoscience actually covers.
Right.
But of course, these 17 are the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. But geoscience, well, geology specifically, deals with a lot of a whole different range of things. So we definitely contribute to even more than these 4 SDGs.
Yeah. What I particularly liked about it is it kind of got me thinking about, for the young graduates, some of the industries that they could get into, right? Because as you said, we think oil and gas, but their whole, water and affordable energy, all these things are things that industries will open because these are goals that people will have. So that was really informative and interesting. And then the other question I had was related to the back end of your presentation, on some of the research that had been done in Forest Reserve. Could you comment on that? And
so I can't really comment on it specifically, but I do have the links and the resources for the papers.
Okay.
So I could do some, if you have any specific questions, I could definitely research it and also send you the papers.
Yeah, I think I'd just like to see the papers, because some of the work that, well, the team at Heritage are involved in involves this field, and it'd be interesting to see, some of the other things that we could do. So yeah, thanks a lot for that. Yeah.
No problem.
Shaquille, maybe you could put your email address in the chat, so if anybody has any questions, or any links that you like David, you could send it to them via email.
Sure.
And I have a question as well. This is a really interesting topic, and it's a really pivotal point for the future generation in geoscience. So I just wanted to know what piqued your interest in sort of pivoting in this direction of geoscience, and any information you can give to future students studying geoscience to help them on this path.
Okay, so it's kind of funny you ask that question. So I actually, in 2021, I believe, 2021 or 2022, I took a trip to the UK, and I was looking at, I not too long finished my degree, and I was looking at master's programs, and the way forward for myself. And basically, I saw some trends that renewable energy, electrification, and EV vehicles was penetrating Europe at a point in time. And well, of course, the invasion with Russia and the problem that gas shortages, well, the problem that Europe had with gas shortages. And I was basically just looking at trends And I actually took a trip to Imperial College to see some of the programs that they had. And I found it very interesting that the whole energy transition and renewable energy, how much potential and how much growth is projected to have. And I just saw myself, I saw a part for myself in that industry as compared to the typical oil and gas industry in Trinidad. And I also have a passion for environmentalism. So I guess that somewhat persuaded me into this path. So I guess, yeah, that's my answer to that. It's basically what I was seeing happening outside of Trinidad and Tobago and seeing where I could fit into that.
Thanks, Shaquille. Do we have any more questions from the audience?
Hi, afternoon, Shaquille. Thank you for the presentation. You said the solar farm at Couva is the first utility scale project, renewable project. But are there any of the other renewable projects that are connected to the grid and feeding into the grid, like maybe the one at the airport, for example?
Yes, so the one at the airport actually is grid connected, and it powers the lighting system and the perimeter lighting at the airport. The Queen's Park Savannah system, it is grid connected. It's not in operation yet because it's not commissioned, but it is working fine. It has been certified and everything. So we have, and I believe we have one other small scale, but it's maybe like 10 kilowatt system compared to the 500 kilowatt system that's on the rooftops and the Piaco airport. But definitely after the solar farm is online and we get the intricacies of, well, TNTech and RIC get the intricacies worked out in relation to the price of renewable energy that will be feed into a lot more grid connected systems, and also the fact that you need a renewable energy generator license for any grid connected system. There are a lot of things to be worked out legislatively, and when that happens, I believe a lot more projects will come online to be grid connected.
Okay. Okay.
Hi, good afternoon, Shaquille.
Good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Hi. Yeah, so really enjoyed your talk, I guess a refreshing change. So just a question, do you have any insight with respect to incentives to residential users to install, say, solar panels, and in some cases, say, feedback into the grid? Like, do you have a sense of where we are, that is Trinidad per se, in terms of that kind of a system to encourage, I guess, smaller scale renewable usage?
Last year or year before, I believe the Ministry of Finance would have created a tax incentive, well, for solar systems. I believe there's a percentage of money you can get back if you try to install if you install a system. It wouldn't be on grid because that's technically illegal without a license. But there is a lot of work to be done when it comes to residential solar because it's too expensive, number one, currently. And well, I guess that's why the Ministry of Finance would have tried to create tax breaks for people who are interested in it. But there's a lot more that's needed to be done. Also, it would become more home solar will be more economical when we get the legislative side of things down, such as the feed-in tariff policy, where you could actually be paid for the electricity that you produce, the green electricity that you produce. So yeah, that's my answer.
Any sense as to, say, potential timelines that we may legislatively be in the place for these things to happen?
No, I have no idea. That's above me.
Okay, thanks. I know some of our Caribbean neighbors are ahead of us in that game.
Yeah, Barbados and Jamaica definitely would be the leaders in the Caribbean when it comes to renewable energy policy. But we are working on it. We are working on it definitely from the ministry side. But the other parts of the pieces of the puzzle have their part to do also.
Good afternoon, Shaquille.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Yeah, hi, good afternoon, Shaquille.
Yes.
Yeah, sorry. Hi, this is Eric Williams.
Hi, good afternoon.
Yeah, it's I'm really pleased. First of all, to thank the GSTT for including me in on this, and to listen to some of the research and the work that you've been doing. I mean, it's really pleased, both from all the different hats that I wear, but particularly as a geoscientist. Just to let you know, historically, we did try to introduce solar panels 20 plus years ago. We started to try to do it with host homes and guest houses. It was funded partly by BP, the UNDP, and my ministry, the Ministry of Energy and Energy Industries. Yeah, you're right. There was a lot of resistance due to the fact that we are heavily, we use the natural gas heavily. You're spot on. We've always known that because of the technology used for the ammonia, the petrochemicals particularly, and then to a lesser extent electricity, that carbon dioxide and methane we are indeed, I think, the largest per capita emitter. You quite rightly pointed out, especially even amongst other natural gas producing countries. So
Yeah.
I'm just really pleased. I just wanted to endorse much of what you're saying. Certainly, I would want to get a copy of the presentation, and I'd be keen to do that. I can reach out to Therese and David
Sure.
for that.
I'll send a copy of
yeah.
the presentation.
Right, yeah. But I just really wanted to say how pleased I am to hear your presentation and to all of the to bring some of that back into view, because some of these things we've known for a long time, but it seems like with institutional memory, we've forgotten some of these truths, and to see that you're reviving and bringing them to the fore. So thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your comments.
Okay, I see Adiola has her hand up.
Hi, good morning. Can you all hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Well, I'm not a geologist, I'm a sociologist. And my question is basically linked to the current geopolitical environment that we're in. Do you see any linkage between our policies and anticipate any changes, especially as it relates to borders and energy, especially with the current situation we have with Venezuela and other borders? Do you anticipate, or do you, what is your comment on the impact of the current geopolitical environment on sustainability?
Okay. I think that right now we're in a position that we could actually leverage a lot of partnerships. So we could start partnering with neighboring countries like Guyana, even Suriname, who have developed their renewable energy resources, and they have more experience in the field with policy development and all these things. And again, they are now developing their oil and gas industries. So we could assist them in that aspect, and they could also assist us in the long term when it comes to renewable energy. But the Venezuela situation, I guess, I mean, oil and gas is directly not my thing right now, but we have a lot of potential between the two countries. I think the World Bank actually did a study on wind resources at the end of, well, near the sea area between Trinidad and Venezuela. There's actually a lot of work that was done by the World Bank there, assessing the renewable energy resources and potential. So I guess once the diplomats from Trinidad side and Venezuela side work out whatever misunderstanding they might have had, we could definitely collaborate and move forward on a lot of different sustainable energy projects.
Okay. Thanks, Shaquille. And we have time for one more question. Okay, so if everyone is good and nobody have any more questions, feel free to reach out to the GSTT or Shaquille's email address. He put it in the chat if you all have any more questions. I just want to say thanks to everyone who turned out today to listen to the technical session. And thank you, Shaquille, for giving the presentation for us today. It was very informative. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
All right, thanks a lot, Shakir. Take care.